Hello, everybody. So, I wanted to make a video on hard science fiction and what it is. Hard sci fi versus soft sci fi versus sci fantasy. So, hard science fiction and why it's very hard to find. It's defined by, I would say, the main feature that sets hard science fiction apart from soft science fiction is whether or not there's faster than light travel in the universe. If you have no faster than light travel and no outright magic, most people will then be willing to call your universe hard sci fi as opposed to soft sci fi. So think of soft sci fi as like, wormholes, time travel, um, let's see. The other things that make something a little bit soft over hard besides wormholes and faster than light travel is, I would say, technology that functions as magic in the world. That is sort of, that's not proven to be possible. So, for example, let's say there's nanotechnology, so nanobots inside the humans that let them become Super Saiyans or something like that. So the nanobots that are in their blood help them fly and do the Kamehameha and blast out a bunch of energy. That would be considered soft over hard because even though it's not scientifically like necessarily disproven, it's also not something that is wholly that feels wholly realistic. So now there's the subgenre between hard sci-fi of very hard sci-fi and like kind of hard sci-fi because for me for me personally, in order to be a hard sci-fi book, it has to have full scientific accuracy. So not just the respecting the speed limit of light and information, but also respecting all the other laws of physics. And that can be something that's really hard to find. Really hard to find. So, if anyone knows of like truly rock hard sci fi that's out there, let me know. Because I would say, for example, a lot of people call James Comey's The Expanse hard sci fi. I would say it's not because, first of all, you cannot do to an asteroid what they do to Ceres in that universe. It wouldn't work. The asteroid would break apart. So there's that aspect. And also I would say that, spoiler alert, like I'll just, not totally spoilers, but the main menace of the series, so like the main antagonist, is on the very, 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 very far edge of realistic, I would say. So I would say that, even The Expanse is not truly hard sci fi because it ignores science for convenience. So, what makes something soft versus hard? It's the extent to which it ignores science for convenience. So, James Comey wanted belters. So, he made belters. Even though asteroids don't work like that, he made belters anyway so that he could have them in the story. Now, is that is that bad to do? No. Is it like is it like against the rules? No. But it's a soft element. So finding sci-fi that is truly hard and takes no liberties is is something that, I mean, honestly, I can't think of one book I've read, maybe Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Or something like Blue Remembered Earth. Maybe some Alastair Reynolds books too. But most sci-fi authors put stuff that's really out there. And for me, I think, guys, it's almost like I think that I think that not a pissing contest, but sci-fi authors get into this kind of competition of who can have the most imaginative concepts, who can have the most wow and pizzazz to their ideas. And it's kind of funny because, like, for me, I've always thought that the coolest ideas are the ones that don't have to ignore science but still are like crazy, you know? Um Something like, even like terraforming Mars and stuff like that is an example. Um and all the crazy things that are made possible by genetic engineering and stuff like that. But most authors don't do that. Um, Most authors, there's also a lot of quantum mysticism in sci fi. So, a lot of sci fi authors will use quantum physics to hand wave away certain things. Most importantly, most commonly, um, the speed limit of information. So they'll 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 maintain there's sci-fi authors who will maintain a slower they'll maintain the speed limit for mass. So if the spaceships are still going slower than light, but information won't have a speed limit. And that would be like the Bobby verse, we are Legion, we are Bob. That would be like Three Body Problem. That would be like man, a lot. There's a lot like that. And I myself, felt like, because I'm writing in what I try to make a fully hard universe, and it's really annoying that characters can't talk to each other if they're too far away. So, you know, a lot of sci-fi authors will hand wave the speed limit of information, and they'll do it with quantum mysticism. Um, no matter how much quantum physics you do, information still has a speed limit. So, even if you use entangled particles, you can't use entangled particles to transmit information, to communicate faster than light. Um, it's just not something that's possible in quantum spacetime. So, um, those are the main categories of like what makes something hard is whether or not there's faster than light. However, there's some very clever ways to get around that, such as Werner Vinge in A Deepness in the Sky by Werner Vinge. He writes like he wrote it so that there's not too many spoilers, but basically the speed limit of light was artificial, or like artificially imposed in our region of space, our region of the galaxy. Um, and that's like, it's like, well, okay, at least he tried to make it. At least it's like pretty hard. It's a little bit harder than just wormholes. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about, because for hard sci-fi, it's like, I would say the phrase is like rock hard sci-fi or ultra hard sci-fi is the sci-fi that breaks no laws of physics. And I think that that's the best sci-fi, and I think that it's a shame that it's not the most common sci-fi. I would say that Brave New World is an example of that. Um and you look at Brave New World, and it's like it's creepy and legendary because of how realistic it is. It's freakishly realistic, especially for the time that it was written, like in terms of like future advancement and stuff. So, um, the reason why it's not more common is because it's difficult. Wow, my hair really got messed up. Is because it's difficult. To make sure that all of your stuff makes sense. Because a lot of the time you just want to have something happen. And if you try to write hard sci-fi, you'll notice that it's really hard to make things happen when they need to happen. Even if you have, let's say you have 5 different star systems interacting and they're all, let's say they're 1,000 light years apart. You have this really complicated, like, how they communicate is like really becomes really complicated, and lining it up so that they can know what the other one's doing at the right time and react in the right way and all that kind of stuff. You have to account for it in the story. And so it's very annoying. So that's why soft sci-fi is popular, and it's also the same reason why hard sci-fi and ultra hard sci-fi are 2 different things, because respecting the speed of light, okay, let's do that. And the way James Comey does it, a lot of authors, is they just stay in one solar system. So, okay, so we don't we don't want to break faster than light and have wormholes to other planets, so we'll just stay in the solar system. Or we'll write a story about some other solar system, but we stay in a small scale. So that's the other way. And I think that that's kind of like, okay. But I want to read, like, Alastair Reynolds is the one who's really good at writing grand scale, like space opera, but still hard sci fi. And that to me is the coolest. Like Alastair Reynolds' House of Suns for me is like the pretty much the gold standard for sci-fi world building. There's some stuff in it that's kind of soft, but overall it's pretty good. If you want to look that one up. But anyways, I'll move on to the difference between soft sci-fi and sci-fantasy. Um, Sci-fantasy is what I would say, like, Adrian Tchaikovsky writes a lot, sort of like his book Cage of Souls, where you have science fiction but with some magic in it. At least a little bit of supernatural or magic or time travel, anything like that. Um even something like Planet of the Apes could be construed as sci-fantasy because of the time travel machine. But sci-fantasy is also more like literally just like the ability to use your mind. Like just straight telekinesis and stuff like that. But with technology still present. So, something, for example, that would be sci-fantasy that I think would be really cool that isn't done often. I don't think I mean, certainly never read a book that does it, but like a spacefaring civilization, but fantasy. So, like, there's still spells and magic and all that kind of stuff, and like enchanted spaceships and stuff like that. But, they travel to other planets and stuff like that. And Brandon Sanderson might do it with the Cosmere eventually, but it's not done very often. But I think that would be really cool, like fantasy, but not planet side fantasy, but in the stars. So that's sci-fantasy, but sci-fantasy also can just stay planet side, of course. Um, yeah. So I think that all sci-fi authors, whether they're doing soft sci-fi, sci-fantasy, or hard sci-fi, are forced to take some liberties. At least some. Every book, every fiction book, there's at least like the tiniest element of suspension of disbelief present in all of it. So like even in Brave New World, like, you know, probably be really hard to make that actually happen, you know. But the suspension of disbelief is not as high as, for example, wormholes. Like wormhole travel between Earth and another planet, like a stable wormhole kind of thing. So, you have to. I think that it's fun to. I prefer like hard, hard, hard. And I personally think that. I personally think that if you add wormholes and stuff, you might as well add magic. So I think that the barrier between soft sci-fi and sci-fantasy should almost kind of be closed, because magic and a wormhole is like sort of the same thing. But and this is how I feel about a lot of sci-fi guys. So in this book right here, Neil Asher, this is the second book in the trilogy, but it's called the Spatterjay trilogy. The first book is The Skinner. Pretty brutal stuff in here. But you know, he has wormholes, so it's soft sci-fi. But he also has stuff that comes off as magic to me. Like there's a gun that shoots a black hole, and like, you know, makes everything around whatever that like black hole is just get wrecked until the black hole like fizzles out. And it's like, okay, like in like a handheld like gun too. It's like, okay, like you might as well just say it's a staff and it's Gandalf casting a spell at that point, you know? Like, it's kind of like there's. Once you get to something that's so, like, preposterous, you might as well just go full fantasy, in my opinion. But, you know, it's all I think a lot of it is kind of like keeping up with the theme, but I think that we can kind of start to break those themes and come up with new themes, you know? Like, okay, so the theme of sci-fi, like, it wouldn't make sense to have a spell all of a sudden, so it's better to say it's a black hole. And it's like, yeah, but neither, like, they're both just totally made up, so you might as well just kind of not be constrained. Um, You know, it's like if you're already deciding that you're not constrained, then you might as well not be constrained. Um However, you know, at the same time you want to have rules in your universes and limits to what people can do. So, but I think that, you know, once you go into black hole guns and stuff, it can be hard to figure out like how firm the rules should be. So, you know, I've always thought like if you're not going to use the laws of physics as your reference and you're going to go into like a black hole gun instead, then you might as well just throw it all out. You know, it's like, well, then why are you using physics at all? Because it puts constraints. But at the same time, it can be a question of the gradient of suspension of disbelief. You know, because you can say like, okay, a wizard casting a spell requires this level of suspension of disbelief, whereas a black hole gun requires this level, and like, you know, super armor or something requires this level, and going all the way down. But for me, I prefer sci-fi that really, really tries to stick to physics. So hard or ultra hard. Um, and it's pretty hard to find. So, you know, I've always felt kind of weird because I don't think the science fiction and fantasy genres should be put together like any more than thriller and horror should be put together. It's like they're sort of related, but not really, in my opinion, because science fiction can be something like, you know, something like Brave New World compared to Game of Thrones. They're not the same thing. Um, but, like I said, all authors use conveniences, and so there's a lot of crossover in the genres, especially in terms of like authorship. Like, if you can write one, you can write the other, kind of. Kinda. There's a lot of authors that write both, but not that many. But I think that most, like, if Brandon Sanderson, I guarantee you, if he wanted to write a sci-fi book, I guarantee you he could. Especially, or like SciFantasy, I guarantee you. So that's why there's like a lot of crossover, is because authors cross over a lot. But at the same time, authors could also do that with fiction. Like if Brandon Sanderson wanted to write something like The Firm, set in like 1990 LA or something, he could probably do that too. So it doesn't make them the same genre. So I think that futuristic science fiction that is that is sort of commenting on the real world in a way by being a realistic future projection, a potentially realistic, even if hyperbolized future projection, it is kind of powerful in a way that fantasy often is not. Like A Song of Ice and Fire, no matter what happens in Westeros or Essos, it's just not the same relevance to our world that fully realistic fiction, such as like 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451, can bring. But at the same time, use you can use fantasy elements to talk a lot about philosophy and stuff like that. So, and also help with that hyperbolization. So, of course, there's reasons to not write hard sci-fi, but I just think that it's something different and special, and it should be respected as such. Um, and the farther into the future you go, the harder it gets, kind of. Not kind of, yeah. The farther into the future you go, the harder it gets. At the same time, though, I kind of went so far into the future that I can like hand wave away the near future. So I kind of just said like, okay, like, you know, stuff goes down on Earth and it turns into two major governments, the free world and the not free world, Cold War 2. And then it just kind of goes from there. Um, but anyways, so for people who have never read any of it before, or because for me I was kind of confused on the terminology, like, okay, ultra hard, hard, soft, and then SciFantasy. And the differences are like easy to understand, but you kind of have to. There's a lot of authors that write in multiple, so it's kind of like um they're very blended together because of that. Especially like in bookstores and stuff. Like you go to a bookstore, there's going to be hard fantasy and hard sci-fi with like grouped together. Let alone, sci-fantasy and hard sci-fi are always going to be just like mixed together. And so it's kind of like, well, what's the real difference? And I think that the real difference is only significant in like the hardest of the hard sci-fis. That and those can really achieve something. I mean, I would even consider I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. You guys like just watch something on YouTube. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Short story from I think the 1950s. Am the machine like you don't think that's realistic? Like it's freakish. It's freakish. It's horrifyingly realistic in my opinion. It's really cool. It's it's horrible and it's horrible, but it's something that you can imagine written back then too, which is amazing. There's also an interview with that author that's really interesting too. Forget his name off the top of my head. I can link it if anyone wants. Yeah, but I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. You can watch something about it on YouTube. Like that's that's hard sci-fi also in a way. Pretty hard. It's pretty hard. And it's horrifying. So, you know, but you can also make stuff really horrifying with fantasy because you have stuff like eternal damnation and people's souls being put into things and stuff like that. And you can do that with technology also, like in I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, but you know, with fantasy, like you know, some fantasy worlds like horrible things happen, like souls being put into eternal bondage to some sadistic freak king and stuff like that. So, yeah, I always love horror. I put a lot of horror into the stuff I write, and so anyway, hopefully kind of like a little bit of an introduction or understanding, and you can see why I try to write ultra hard sci-fi. I'm sure that there's more suspension of disbelief than I think, but my first novel, my first full-length novel, is in the editing stage right now. So our our goal is to have it edited by March 31st, but that's a pretty ambitious goal. It's probably going to be the end of April. And then since I've never done it before, I don't know how long it's going to take to go from my finished manuscript to a finished ebook because I have to make the ebook in vellum and make it look nice and put the maps in and everything. But it shouldn't take that long. So it's pretty exciting. So I'll have my first novel out. I'll have my first novel out by summertime for sure. And it'll be available on ebook. And I'm thinking I'll order like, I'll probably buy like 100 print copies. And then just keep those to bring to book fairs and stuff. You know, I can set up my stand at book fairs and things and just have it there. And then I'm gonna do more once I actually have my published book. I can do more author stuff. But I'm also gonna be releasing a short story collection at the same time because I have a bunch of short stories that didn't fit into the overall novel, and frankly, like low key, some of the stuff in the novel doesn't totally fit either. But it was like cool, so I put it in. But I'm also going to be publishing short stories. If anyone is, I have enough to show, so I can put a sample chapter. I can provide sample chapters of what I write. I'm going to start doing that. I'm nervous about like how to promote myself, but I do have enough now to be able to like start putting it out there. Um, you know, sneak peek, sample chapters, stuff like that. Maybe a short story or two. But it's kind of weird because my universe, it kind of takes investment to get into. And so I'm trying to figure out the best way to make the website. Because I have a website for my universe, gerpilauniverse.com, and it's under construction. you know, because I'm trying to figure out what the best medium is to communicate like my hard sci-fi world. So novels are just one way and not even that efficient a way, you know, to get lore out, lore and world building. So, you know, it's kind of a lot to think about. Um, so yeah, I went on a little tangent at the end there just about me, but yeah, so those are the genres. Uh, cool. Thanks.